see how it goes. Okay, so what we at least need to do is go through the shapes that you have, modulate those, and link them to drivers. Okay. Once you've done that, then we need to add a jawbone, add an eye rig, and that would be like minimum requirements for making this thing work well. Okay. However, having said that, also facial rigging and rigging in general in Blender is something that is, excuse me, very open to interpretation. I don't know what the word is. Undocumented. Okay, and there are millions of ways to do this, and this is obviously just one of them. Okay, so it's not saying that this is the only way to do it. It's definitely not. And it's also something that you can go on and on and on with forever, literally, which I have in this case. So I've added extra things here which you guys don't really need, but I'd be happy to show you guys if you're interested at some point. Not today though. And it's, you know, the more you do with it, the more you can animate, and the easier the animation becomes, and the more dynamic your poses become. And in the least part, adding more control enables for better animation. So particularly, well, going through it. So for instance, the one thing that we definitely need to do is splitting up. So you'd have a brow up and down shape that you guys would have made, and then basically chopping it up into pieces and linking those individual pieces to different controls. Okay, that's the whole idea behind a modulated face rig, which is kind of what this technique is. So it's taking, I don't know why that's broken now. It's taking a base face shape. So you've made shapes that move your brows collectively up and down, and the eyes open and close, and all of that, and chopping it up into pieces and modulating them using a vertex group, and then linking those controls of those shapes individually to different controls. So we're adding a lot of functionality to one basic shape that we made originally. So for instance, with the brows, being able to position them separately so that you can get firstly like more dynamic poses, I expect, but then also you can animate them individually, so you can get nice overlap and that kind of thing in your brows, which also helps. Same thing with the eyes, where if you do, you don't, like, again, with this whole process, you need to take it as far as you need to take it. So, I mean, no one's saying you need to have 20 different controls just for one eyelid. But obviously, the further you take it, the more animatable it is. You can over-rig something as well and add more functionality or make it like cumbersome to work with, which is also not useful. But having the ability to, for instance, position the eyes not just open and close, so you can get nice like kind of S-curves in your eyes, so you can do more interesting things. I've always liked having that kind of thing. So for instance, you can get like really angry kind of eyes out, you know, with curves in the eyes and the brows and all of that. It's really ugly, this dude, if it looks like that. Anyway, I also like to, particularly with the eyes and the brows, a lot of times, say now if we have the brows moving down, then like that chunk of the eyelid sometimes either stays open or down, whatever. But I like being able to move that independently, and that's kind of a corrective shape, you could kind of call it, which then basically I have a separate control which just fills up that gap. And what it does is it really just moves that top eye crease down, which then makes these closed or like down brow positions look a little bit better. I have the same thing with the bottom eye. So that's not something you'd use on its own, but in conjunction with, for instance, the cheek moving up or the lower eyelid moving up. Yeah. Also filling up that little gap over there, moving up the nostril, all of these things. I mean, the more bits you have to use, and I mean, it really does add for just more interesting facial animation for characters that need it. Then things like linking up all the corners, well, all the shapes of the corner of the mouth together. So we have one control that basically moves the up and the down and the out and the in, which is very cool. also having controls to be able to roll the lips in and out. So I don't actually have an out one, but that's the in one, and that's also in one. They're not the best shapes, but they're actually okay. And then obviously a jawbone, which is also very important. I've actually got a couple, but only one is really necessary. And that then obviously opens his jaw. Okay. So in the least, we do need to look at splitting up the shapes for the brows, linking the eyes, and then setting up the mouth. Okay, so that's pretty much the basics. And then you can take it much further. So I added in like a control that goes and tips the mouth closed, and then you can close the, well, rotate the jaw and the mouth stays closed, which I thought was pretty cool. And in this case, let me just show you where I did use it. On the biz and the piz, being able to use that, it really opens the mouth in a nice way over there. So it doesn't just open the mouth immediately, it opens from the middle and then looks like the lips are sticking together a little bit. So if you look there, that's, you know, nifty. And it works. It is pretty cool. So then that's what I'm saying. So like these kind of things you can really rig forever. Whether you'll use all the controls, who knows. Okay. And then I also have little things that just tweak the shape of the mouth. So you can really go and move those independently if you want to get nice, interesting mouth shapes. Cool. Anyway, so let's get started. I'm just briefly going to go through just the core concepts of this. So modulating a shape and linking that to a driver. Okay, and that, I don't like doing it on something that's not the end thing, because sometimes there's some losing in translation. But let's say there's my character and here is my facial rig. Okay, so literally just two things. Okay, so in terms of this, I'm quickly going to make a shape. So this is my brows, so let's call that brow. I'm going to do that in X mirror, so whatever I do on this side, it will do on that side as well. Let's just turn on. Okay, so just quick basic face shape. Okay, so brows going up now. Fantastic. Okay, so the first thing, if we are modulating shapes, okay, so for instance on this dude, in terms of what we need is obviously a shape, and then we're basically saying look at only a certain portion of that shape and the vertices involved in that shape and create a new shape selecting only a certain bunch of those. So we'll have a vertex group which has, say now, the left side or the right side of the face, and we apply that vertex group to the shape, okay, and say only activate the points of this shape if those points are in this vertex group, and then we make a new shape based on that. Okay, so the vertex groups, basically the biggest ones that we need is basically a left and a right side of the face. Okay, so this dude's, if we go and look at his, there's the left one, and there somewhere there is the right. Okay, so the only or the biggest important thing about these two vertex groups, okay, is that the whole left side is 100% and the whole right side is 100%. And then the middle or the center edge loop is half and half. Okay, so that would then be 0.5 on the left and 0.5 on the right. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? I'm going to show you now. Okay, so that the combined, if we go and chop the shape into two, okay, so we have a left and a right, if we activate both of those, they still have to equal the original shape. Okay, so that's why we have that 0.5 on this center line. Okay, so that these center points would move half with that side and then half with this side, and we put both of them on. They both add up to 1. Okay. Anyway, so let's do it over here, for instance. So to do that, I'm going to make a single vertex group. I'm going to rename that. I like to give most things in Blender like a prefix. So I would call these vertex groups mod, okay, for a modulation group or whatever. We'll see over here I have similar things for like, for instance, the deformation groups have DEF in the front of them. I have for my emission groups for hair and stuff, I have emit. It's an easy way to sort them, and also then you can just type in mod and then there are all your modulation shapes. So when we're actually applying these, it's easier to get to them, which I just think is a good workflow. So if I say mod, and then face, and then dot left. Okay, the dot left is important. Okay, so Blender naming conventions between left and right is a dot and a capital L and R, which, if you look now, if we start weight painting then on this side of the face, as soon as we start painting there, it creates a mod face dot right, which is useful. Let me just make this bigger so you guys can see better. And I can see less. Does that help? I think so. Cool. So what we would do is go and paint the whole side to 1. Or we can go in wireframe view, select the vertices of those that we want. Okay, so select all of those and say with the weight of 1, assign. Okay, that would then go and do that. Okay. However, if you assign vertices, they stop mirroring vertices, so you need to assign them on the other group as well. Okay. So in that case, you would go and say deselect those, select those, and assign that to the right group. Okay. The center group then, or the center edge loop, we then need to select, and the easiest way to do that is set the influence of that to 0.5 and assign it as 0.5 to both groups. And that way, we'll have our left group with 100% on this side, 50% on that side, and nothing on that side, and the same on the other side, just the opposite. Okay, that makes sense to everyone?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so now the easiest way to go and break this up. Okay. Let's first of all, just object mode. Okay. First, you need to activate the shape. That's very important. Okay, so say I want 100% of the shape. Also, when you're doing this, you shouldn't have any other shapes active. Okay, so make sure everything is on 0 and only activate the shape that you are busy modulating. Otherwise, it's going to include any other shapes that are active on your modulated shape, which you don't want. Okay, so turn it on. Select the vertex group that you want to work with. So if you have a whole bunch of these, which you would have because you've already rigged it, so all of the deformation things as well, then you just type in there mod and it will only show you all the modulation shapes, and then you say left, and now you can see what that's done already. So now it's only doing it on the left side of the face. With it still on, you then say on the drop down over there, new shape from mix. So it's basically saying whatever the mix is of these shapes, and that's why if other shapes are activated, it's going to include those. Whatever that mix is, make a new shape that looks the same. So if you say the new shape from mix, it'll make a new shape that no longer has the vertex group on, but only is using those points. Okay, that is it. Okay, then we do the same thing. So keep it on, switch this to the right side, new shape from mix, and then that would have made one of those. Okay, now depending on how much you're going to go and chop this up, for the brows, I definitely recommend having an inner, a middle, and an outer brow. I think that's, for animation purposes, that's awesome. For the eyelids, it's less important to have that much control, but still very useful. I would recommend it, but I mean, it's up to you. And in that case, if I just go back to this guy and just look at his shapes, don't render it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so if we look at this guy, by the time I've finished making just all of the base shapes, I have a brows up, a brows down, a brows furrow. I'll talk about fixed shapes just now. I have an eye full, which is that weird thing that just fills up there. I have the upper lid going down, the upper lid going up, the lower lid going up. Those corrective shapes which change the position of those eye creases. I have one that scrunches the corner of the eyes a little bit. the nostrils moving up a little bit like that, and then one that emphasizes that nasal crease, the cheeks going up, the cheeks going out, which isn't great, but it's a tough one. Then the mouth ones where the corner's going up, the corner's going back, the corner's going down, and the corner's going in. Then from there I have a snarl. That's not the snarl. That's the snarl. Okay, a snarl, which does that. The lower lip rolling into the mouth. I actually forgot to make ones where the lower lip actually and the upper lip rolls out, okay, which is also very important, so you need that as well. The upper lid going into the mouth. It's not. Oh, it's an animated driver. I just broke it. Ah, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so the upper lid's going up, the lower and the upper lip going in. Then I have ones that move the mouth up and down, which are just for fun. And then I have one that actually just squashes the lips together, but the way I set it up doesn't really work well, so I didn't use it. Okay. I'll talk about fixed shapes later. But from that, there we go. Okay, from that then, when I start modulating from here, the list becomes very long. So you can see the brows up, brows down, upper lid up, upper lid down. And for instance, if I have an outer, middle, inner, center, inner, middle, outer, those are 7 new shapes that you make. And if you copy and paste this name onto the modulated new shape from mixed shape, because I'm lazy, don't rename them. So I just leave them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and then on the left and right ones, I just have a 1 and a 2. Eyes, 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 nostrils, cheeks, corner of the mouth, snarl, more eyes, and then that's it. Okay, and once you've linked all of those, then you're pretty much there. Okay. Yeah. Any questions about modulating face shapes before we move on? Yeah.
Can you just demonstrate how you cut the eyebrow? Do you use
Okay.
vertex paints?
Yes. Okay. So there. Okay. So exactly the same thing as the left and the right. It's just now obviously chopped up into 7 and not just 2. Okay. So with that, so our left and our right. The same thing now applies, okay? So we have a left and a right, and the center line, which is in between those two, needs to be basically fading and shared equally between those shapes, okay? The same thing happens with the brows potentially, okay? So with the brows, I then have, or the brows and the eyes, I have a center group, okay, which basically controls that center portion, okay? Then I have an inner shape, which controls this first chunk of the eye, well, of the brow. And with regard to the eye, it controls the corner and the first edge loop. Okay, so I think most of your characters now, if I had anything to do with it, only have 3 edge loops coming into each eyelid. Okay, and this is honestly why I kind of stick to that rule. Okay, because that way rigging this becomes very easy. If you have 4 or 5 or 7 or whatever, this becomes more confusing. Yes, yes. These you need to go and paint. Okay. So the inner one, which the biggest thing is the first this first edge loop of the eye and the brow. Okay, and then going to the center, it basically distributes itself out to 0. So here, for instance, I have this extra geometry over there, and then I just worked out. Okay, there are 3 edge loops. And I want from there it to go to 0 to there, so that means that that's at 1, that's at 7.5, that's at 0.5, and that's at 0.25, and that's at 0. Okay, so that my vertex groups blend and fade properly together. So when they're all on, everything's at 100%. But the distribution between those is nice and gradual. Okay. The middle one, which is then pretty straightforward, that's literally just 1 edge loop painted 100%. The outer one is then this corner of the eye and everything after that. Okay, and the same thing on the other side. So the only if you have 3 edge loops on the eye and the brow, the middle one is 100%, and then anything to the other side is 100%, and anything to the other side is 100%, except for where it blends in with the center. And the same thing with the center, I'll get to now. It then is 100% of here and fades out to 0 before it gets there. Okay, so that and that combined, all of those points are on 100%. Does that make sense?
You select the vertices and assign the value.
Sometimes.
Just so that you don't paint the brush, edge select and then
So yeah, you can do it that way. So if you go into edit mode, you can. There's also now. Do you see this? That's cool. That's like soft edit. So here you can go and specify the weights per vertex group. So for instance, if you have a point selector, so let's say the center group. If you go and select all of those those points, okay, they're selected if you can't see it. Anyway, they're selected. You can then go and assign them 100% to, or whatever value to the group. So that would be part of the middle group. I just set that to 1 and I'd say assign. Okay, and it's also, this is a nice way to see what values are being used by any vertex group on a point. So for instance, as we were saying here, where it's 100% here on the center group, on the inner group, so there you see mod I, the inner left is 100%. It's actually 0.003 on that middle group, so I can actually just take that down to 0. Okay, and then that would fade out. So there it is then 0.75 there, and 0.25 on the center one. That one is 0.5 and 0.5. That one is 0.25, and then that one is just 1.
If you change it there, now do you need to say normalize, or does it change automatically?
Yes, you need to say normalize. Okay.
And did you do the same with the mouse?
No.
Like those
No.
little ones that you activate?
No. I'll just mention what I did there just now. But in terms of just the shapes and modulating, this is literally just the left and the right. And like from experience, I've found that doing 100%, well, only having it blend on that center edge loop, that's enough. Like I've tried it in the past where you go from this corner at 100 fading out to that side at 0, and that's not cool. So just having a left and a right works really well. Okay, and that way you can create all of the shapes. Okay, everyone happy with that? Cool. Okay, now the next thing that we need to look at quickly is the technique of linking a shape key using a driver to a bone, this parameter. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to demonstrate here. So just on a property on this to go and, well, let's not do it on that. Let's actually make it a on the face. Okay, so let's just start that again. Okay, so I've got my 2 shapes. So I want to have a control for that brow and for that brow. Okay. Now, just one thing that I like to have in place, and it really is nice for animation, is that that control sticks basically to where the skin is. Okay, so we pull it up, and the amount that we pull it up is the same amount that the shape moves. Okay, which is really, it's just nicer for animation. Okay, so just bear that in mind. So to do this, you guys will have your armature for your body's rig, okay? And generally I set this up as a separate armature just so that there's less bones or fewer bones involved while you're setting it up and then merging it later, okay? So first of all, create a new armature single bone.
Sorry, last year we kept the face rig separate and just parented to the head.
to the head bone.
Yeah, because when you say key all, that it keys the entire body rig, it doesn't key the face rig, so you can still animate the key. So when you say key entire armature, then it keys 2 separate.
And then you have 2 armature modifiers.
Yeah, you would have to.
Couldn't you have separate keying sets?
Oh, no, wait, the one armature doesn't affect isn't weight painted at all because it's only driving shapes.
Last year it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Just say. But that proves your point. We're like, even between me, you, and Sean, we always disagree on how to make
Everything.
There's so many ways to skin a cat.
But only one way to make a face shrink. No, I'm joking. Okay, but yeah, well, you could also then, if it is one rig, you make a new keying set for just the body and then just the face. And then when you do press that, no, keying set's totally different. A keying set, if you are in the timeline and click over there, that is a keying set. These are keying sets. Okay, there's now a new button keying set in the newest one, as well as B-bone shapes. But you can make these.
Yeah.
So you can go and that's literally a group. You say in the armature tab here somewhere, or it's either in the armature in the scene settings, where there's all the keying sets. And you can go and wherever they are, keying sets, there we go. So we can make a new one and call it body. And then you literally go, it's a bit tedious, but you can then say, select all the controls and add them to that keying set. So that way when you're over here and you're on body, then you're only keying the keys of your character's body.
It will still move with the other key sets.
Yeah.
So you have like a master set and then so then
So let's say you lose something on the face, and you say select all key, it only keys the face, you have the face key selected, not the entire body.
Because you don't have to select
Because
all,
otherwise
you
it's
just,
going to integrate into keys and it's going to, okay.
yeah, it'd be,
But
But-
so you just isolate the different keys.
yeah. That's how one can go about it. Anyway, let's start over here. Okay, so first of all, we have our bone. When I'll go through just the basic structure, I'm just looking at one thing now. Okay, so we're just looking at this one control of this one character. Okay, so I'm still in edit mode. Be sure to make any of these changes in edit mode and not just moving the whole rig around. That's quite important as well. Okay, so now I've placed it so that the tail of the bone is more or less where the brow is, okay, because that is where the pivot point is of this control, or a bone. And then in the bone tab, I'm going to name it, so I'm going to say brow dot left. Okay, you could probably give it a better prefix if you wanted to, but let's leave it there for now. Okay. Now, in pose mode, what we want to do is two things. First of all, well, this is the whole process that I use. So the first thing I do is I activate the shape, okay, which is that one, okay. So I do that. Then I go and reposition this object in pose mode to where I want it to be. Hello? Where I want it to be when the shape is activated. Okay. For the sole reason that I want to know how far that control has moved to ultimately activate the shape in its entirety. Okay. Which is 0.185. Okay, so I'm going to remember 0.185. Okay. Then this shape is still active, and just be aware of that because this will change something now. Okay. Now, to create the driver, it's actually very straightforward. I'm going to open up a new window, and I'm going to set that to the driver view. Okay. And then, going to close that. Let's just open this a little bit more. Okay. Now, on your shape, you right-click and you say Add Driver. Okay. It now in 2.8 makes this tab, which is great, but as soon as your cursor goes off of it, it disappears. Okay. So to get it back in the driver view, the N menu, okay, it's over here. But first we need to go and select this actual shape key in this. Okay. And it's found under Suzanne, under all the shape keys, and there it is. Okay, and that will have the same name that you have there. So that is brow.left. That will tell you exactly what it is. Okay, so make sure you have this selected. And this by default keeps the previously selected shape. So if you are setting up your whole face rig and you come back to this and you start changing things, it will change the last one that you had active, so it's easy to break your previous ones if you haven't gone and reselected that. Okay, select that. Then in the driver tab, this is that panel that popped up. And this is where we say this is where what we want to link the value, which is important to know, the value of the shape key to. Okay, and this little input over there is where we select it. Okay, so just explaining what's going on here at the top. There are different ways that it can calculate this. A scripted expression, I tend to leave it on there because recently they've, well, it's what it is. Then this expression is basically what it's looking at. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this now. But the variable in the expression is the actual parameter that we're linking it to. And this is where we specify what that parameter is. Okay, so there it says variable. And here we go and look for this object and select which axes of translation we want to use. Okay, so first of all, select the armature, then you go and select the bone. Okay. Then we need to know what to link it to. So we want to move this thing up and down in pose mode to link it to, and make that influence the value of the shape, right? And just to make sure, normally in Blender, up and down is a Z-axis translation, but when it comes to this, because of the rotation of the bone and the axes that bones have by default, it's slightly different. So if you go into pose mode, select it, activate your transform gizmo, and then set it to local space, which we'll get to now as well. We'll see that the local space on this bone, up and down, is Y. Okay, so that we need to be aware of. So in global space, up and down Z, but the local space transform up and down is the Y-axis.
Alternatively, you select it, you jig it. If it doesn't work, you try the other one.
You change it.
Layman's, yeah.
What did you select? You change it from global to local.
If you press full stop on your keyboard. Okay, so local is important. So just a slight detour. The reason why it needs to be on local space. Okay, so we're going to have this bone parented to a whole bunch of other things connected to our character's head, and our character's head is connected to the rest of the body, right? So if we move our character's hips forward, that bone moves in world space. Okay, so that means we can't look at a world space translation because that is influenced by our entire character. So we need to look at its personal movement. So only transforms that are directly applied to that bone and not its parents is local space. Okay, so we need to look at its local space and not the world space. Okay, so going back to this. So we want, the answer to our question is we want the Y local location. So, back over here, we still have armature selected, the brow, and then we want Y location in local space. And doing that will immediately, you'll see that this is now doing something. Okay, so if I were to go and move that, you'll see it's doing something, but is it doing something? It's I think it is. Oh, sorry. It's not doing something. And the reason why it's not doing something is actually quite simple. When we linked it, we added the driver. This value was 1. So Blender thought that we did that on purpose, which we didn't actually. It was just because we wanted to know where to put the bone. But because you linked it with this on 1, this expression is now looking at the variable plus whatever value we started on. So that expression is now variable plus 1, okay, which we don't want because now that means it's only going to start working when the position of that control is at 1 and then it looks at the variable. Okay, it's exactly. So we're only interested in the variable itself. So we can just say variable. Just so that you're aware, if you were to do it when it's on 0, so if we were to add a driver and something else on 0 and look at that, by default it is variable plus 0. So it's looking at the variable plus whatever initial value you had. So if you do set it when it's on 0, then it's fine. Otherwise, just take out everything and just leave that at variable. Okay. Cool. Let's jump back. Okay, so that's going to do something. Okay, and what that does is now variable location, cool. So see, now it's doing it, okay, which is cool. Okay, so it's doing it, but it's now moving. We need to pull it a lot further away from the control, from the face, to actually make it work. Okay, and that is why we looked at what that location value was, where the control is over there. Okay, remember it was 0.0185. Okay, now going back over here. Okay, so just to explain why we need to pull it that high up to make it work. Okay, two things. In this, the first tab over here is the F curve, and this is this. So a driver basically is controlled by a F curve. Okay, and what this F curve is saying, if we look at the points of it, it's got two keys on it by default, and the first key is at 0 and 0 on this graph. And what this graph is representing, first of all, is a frame and a value. Okay, frames in Blender is always left and right. Okay, so that is this way. Value is always up and down. And for us, this value is the value of the shape key. Okay, so that's nifty. The frame is being used to represent the transformation amount, whether that's a location transform or a rotation or a scale transform. So the up and down value on this graph is the shape itself. Okay, so and then the this way is the distance or the amount of rotation or scale that you apply to this object. So the second key that we have over there is at 1 and 1. Okay, which is why this shape, okay, is set to 1 when the frame value, which we now know is the distance value of the control, is going to be 1. So if we just look at that here in the corner, okay, in pose mode, if we go and pull this up, by the time it reaches 1 over there, you can see it's now at 1, that shape is now full. Okay, so that's great. And if we understand that, what that allows us to do is realize that in this frame value is basically how far we need to move the control to make the value of the shape be 1. And we said we want to move it 0.185. Was it 0.185 or 185? Okay, and that updates our graph, and that means that in pose mode, I must say, doing this, you jump between object mode and pose mode so often you get confused. That means now that our graph says at 0, where my control is now at 0, my shape is at 0. Okay, so that key, 0 and 0, okay, when my control is at 0, the shape must be at 0. That key is saying when my control is at 0.185, the value must be at 1. So let's see if that is actually doing that, and we move that up. And you can see that is. Okay, so there it is, more or less sticking to our skin. Okay, so the easiest way to think of this is as soon as you link it, okay, you add a driver, you specify what parameter you want to use, okay, you check beforehand the distance that you want to move that object, and you literally go and enter that distance into the frame value of the activated keyframe. Okay, and the activated keyframe is the keyframe where the value of the shape is at 1. Okay, so the easiest thing, that frame of the activated activated keyframe needs to be the distance or the amount of rotation that you want to apply to the thing to make it work.
Add a constraint on the bow now.
Yes, okay. Directly after you do this, while you can still remember what this number is, okay, it's best to go and add a constraint onto this bone so that we can't just pull that control away, away from the character itself. Okay, so like here, they all stop at some point. Okay, so ideally, we only wanted to pull it until it stops influencing it. Okay, which is important for a lot of things. It makes it easier to animate with. Also, I won't even go into that. Never mind. Okay, it's important. Just accept it. Okay, so to do that, select the bone in pose mode. Okay, and it's a constraint called limit location. Okay, and what this does is it basically says minimum and maximum values for the location, so for transformation on the location, for each axis. So we know, first of all, it needs to be on local space because we're constraining it on local space. And we only really want to use this control in the y-axis. So the x, and the z, I tend to turn on and leave, okay? And that means that we won't be able to move it left or right or forward and backward. But wait, there's more, okay? I'm gonna come back to that. For the y, we want to be able to move it up in a positive direction, which is maximum, of 0.185. And let's just limit the y to nothing. Okay, so that way we can pull it up. When it gets to 185, it's going to stop. However, it's not actually stopping just yet. Okay, this constraint, as it's currently set, even though it's not moving over here, if you look at these values, they are still changing. Okay, which doesn't help us actually at all. And to fix that, like ideally if we pull the x, we want that to stay on 0. And we want the position of the y to stay on our maximum value that we specified there. And to fix that, we need to go and click that for transform button. Okay, and what that'll then do is when it gets to 185, it stops. And the x's and the z's, they don't do anything. Okay. You could lock them, but this is, someone could easily just unlock it. Okay, and I tend to use the lock features for something else, which I'm going to say now.
So an error if you try and key with lock parameters. You get a warning every time.
Isn't.
Yeah, you're trying to key lock parameters and then there pops up a little.
That keyed fine.
Down there somewhere it would say something to you. Right? It wasn't supposed to key it. First night.
It happily keyed it. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, the other thing, this lock does more than just, what I use this lock for is mostly it turns off the display of the gizmo, right? So if I only want to be able to use this on the Y translation, turning off the X and the Z only leaves me with the Y arrow, which is a nice tool for the animator. Okay, so if they get it and they click translate and they see there's only one active gizmo that they can use, they know that's the only thing they can use. So for instance, sometimes, say you wanted to have another shape linked to the scale value, okay? In which case, say now you wanted to squash the brow when it scales on the Y as well. Then you can leave the Y active on the scale, okay? But we don't want any animation on the rotation. So that way, when the animator gets it and they go into scale, they're like, oh wait, there's a scale gizmo. Apparently I can do something. And then they use it and then, okay, there's something linked there. Okay, so it's a nice way also just to indicate what is animatable if you're working in a group.
It only locks the stuff for that, but
yes. Yeah, this is independent of that. Okay, the last thing before we look at just the other big stuff, okay, is then it's not fun looking at a rig that has just a whole bunch of bones everywhere. Okay, so ideally we want to be able to look at it in a nicer way, and that's why these visual little displaying a different object for the visual thing is a bit better. Okay, also, I mean, you can go and give different pictures as opposed to different controls, which indicate different things. We don't just want to look at a whole bunch of octahedral bones because that'll be a horrible thing to animate with. So it is nice to just go and link a different thing. And you can link literally any geometry and use that as the visual display for the bone. Okay. So for instance, as an example, you could go, and to do it, you go into the bone tab under viewport display, and you set a custom object for the display over there. You could use Suzanne if you wanted to, and just set it to wireframe. Okay. And that way your control is a little Suzanne bobbing around. I wouldn't, but it's possible. Okay. But knowing that, it's literally a mesh. So if we go and say make a new curved circle, which is what I tend to use, Also, these I like to name them and call them WGT and then whatever circle, so that you can use more than one widget for different controls. You then go into there, you have a lot of stuff, you type in WGT, all your widgets, and there you have that. Okay, and the easiest way to build these is make it, link it, and then edit the shape further. Okay, because then as you can see here, it's flat and there it's standing upright. The axes of rotation and whatever is different. So then you can go and position it wherever you want. So for instance, I want it smaller and further away from the character, so then I just move it over there. Okay, and now I have that control. That happens a lot. I do that here so often where I go and I want to move that and I select it, and then you actually move the rig itself, and to avoid that, just lock them. Okay, so just in object object mode, select it and just lock everything so you can't move your actual rig. Pose mode, bingo. You see, so now you have a nice little custom control for your character's brow. Those are all the techniques that we really need to use to link these to drivers. Let's take a 5-minute break before we carry on. There is still some stuff that we need to go through. So yeah, let's take 5 minutes and we can keep going. We need to look at building an